Let's before we go into the topic of today, which is the really burgeoning and growing Trump cultural movement that I think is overtaking the country. Let's just briefly talk because we're reaching out to Michael Flores as a potential guest, and he has a new essay on the war against Christmas. Give us a quick overview on that.
Well, I didn't even complete reading the thing because it just came out.
Hmm.
But as always with Flores, uh, some interesting insights. Those of us uh, with chronological superiority affliction seem to think that all this stuff is brand new. But apparently, the war on Christmas at least goes back to Woodrow Wilson,
Ah, yes.
of unhappy memory.
Yeah.
So, and no doubt there's many other tidbits in this thing that frankly I didn't get to yet. But
Right, and it doesn't surprise me that it's a war on Christmas, a war on Christianity, a war on the fact that this is a Christian nation. As a non-Christian myself, I totally support that, and I thank God for that. I mean, it's in a sense, it's the flowering of Christian faith and culture. That being the United States, being a nation which I think gets back to actually the original mission of Jesus, which is the individual having a personal relationship with God through Jesus as an intercessor, and an embrace of the Sinaitic code of morality and ethics, which Jesus said in the book of Matthew, not one jot or tittle shall be changed
right,
of that until the end of time. So it's the foundation of American culture. Woodrow Wilson, who was an avowed socialist and who wrote about that in many of his scholarly tomes in the 1880s, 20 years before, well, 1890s, 20, 30 years before he became president, whatever the date, uh, really presided over a major change in the way we see ourselves as Americans. He implemented direct taxation, the 13th Amendment. He signed the Federal Reserve Act, which transferred our monetary system to one that was debt based and managed by a quasi public agency instead of directly by Congress. He implemented, World War One, direct election of senators, which had a weakening of the power of the states, and a bunch of other things. I mean, it's all the way up to prohibition, which was in a way the federal government's first direct experiment in social control over people by telling you what you can drink. So you have uh, besides the fact that he was an internationalist and he believed in the policy of perpetual war for perpetual peace, which of course was the subject of Harry Elmer Barnes's book in the 1920s when he exposed the fact that Wilson had pre-planned America's entry into World War One many, many years before we did and had
right.
lied about it to get reelected.
Well,
So,
as long as we're on that subject, why does Wilson get a free pass somehow?
well, he's a hero of the international establishment. And the left wing, street organizers and thugs. His vision was to erode American sovereignty and to turn the United States into a colony of the world. His main, guide, who, by the way, he had a falling out with toward the end of his life, because I think he had second thoughts, but it was already too late. His terrible career had already damaged the world.
Yeah,
But that being Edward Mandell House, who wrote a book, a sort of one of these veiled fictional books called Philip Drew Administrator. I think he wrote it and published it in 1912. I mean, the year Wilson was elected, which basically this fictional character would become dictator of the entire Western Hemisphere and would implement socialism and would basically interact with other similar dictators who would control other continents to create a world order. In fact, I think it was House who actually coined the phrase "New World Order"
hmm,
in that book. It was a very popular book in the around Wilson's time of being elected. He was an advisor to Wilson, went with him to Versailles to help negotiate the end of World War One, and this was the ethos at the time. Fortunately, he wanted to bring the United States into the League of Nations, which at that time was clearly a world government. And, I mean, eventually it became watered down, but it was stopped by Massachusetts Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, who said no to that. Mainly, I don't think it's because he disagreed with it, but it's for personal reasons. He just hated Wilson. They were like rivals. And, whatever the reason, it had the effect of stopping the U.S. from entering into that organization, and that ended their power. Of course, it would make a comeback in the form of the United Nations after World War
Yeah.
II. So, they certainly didn't give up on it.
Well, I guess what I was referring to is that at the time there were dissenters from FDR. Uh, there were, it wasn't a large number, but there were people that were against him contemporaneously, and there were probably people against Wilson contemporaneously. But there's a lot of people that hate, and justly so, FDR. But there's
Right.
the much smaller number of people that despise Wilson for being maybe the originator of some of this stuff.
That's,
So I'm
it's
I
an interesting
wonder why
question.
he's gotten not a complete free pass, but if you look at the destruction that was created in his administration, uh, he got off pretty easy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, during World War One, when we intervened in that European war, which of course was a violation of Washington's farewell address,
Yeah.
which had been the American policy from that time forward, he implemented what can only be described as the closest thing this country would ever see to a socialist dictatorship. There was no freedom of the press. People were put in prison for
Right.
dissent. In a way, something similar to what's being implemented now, not only with COVID, but also with the attack on supporters of Trump being put in prison for long prison sentences for doing nothing. And even now, there's a new threat. I don't know if you saw this, but something with Twitter being turning over files of people who questioned the election.
Well,
You
well,
know,
no, it's actually worse than that. It's worse than
yeah,
that. The request, which is absurd, is essentially anybody who posted or liked anything
hmm
on Trump's Twitter feed, which is going to be tens of millions of people,
yeah, including me, by the way, and I'm happy to say that.
including many people.
Oh yeah, I love Trump's Twitter feed.
It's outrageous,
Yeah,
and
yeah, but it's real, and this is what's coming down. And Victor Davis Hanson, who's a pretty good, academic and writer, has done a talk on that's going viral, where he says that next year, 2024, is going to be a very dangerous and very dodgy year for this country, mainly because Trump is doing well, and because this kind of uniparty establishment, this left wing entity, which really was established under Wilson to bring things up to today,
yeah,
that took Trump out, basically stole the election last time. They're not going to go down quietly. They're not going to let Trump just sort of waltz back into office with a free election. I don't think there's been a free election. I wonder if there's been a free election in this country since Jefferson. But putting that aside, uh, they're not going down easy, and it's going to get real ugly. And we're going to see things next year that you would never even dreamed could have happened, including probably Trump put in prison, and the opposition. I mean, one scenario that I've heard is that if Trump is convicted, you're going to see people like myself, maybe someone like you, people reacting to that with white hot anger and sending out tweets and sending out comments saying this is, Nazism. we have to stand up to this, and making veiled comments like that. And the FBI is going to swoop in and pick them all up en masse, and they're going to be taken away. Now, people, oh, I'm exaggerating, I'm fear mongering, fine. I stand by that as someone who has studied Nazism pretty clearly. I'm not sorry to bring this up, but I shall bring it up in spite of E. Michael Jones's book, the Holocaust Narrative. I did have family members who died in the Holocaust. I did grow up hearing about this and thinking about it. It does affect my view on the world. And I'm going to say it now. This is very much reminiscent of what happened in the 1930s when people were swept up off the street and sent to concentration camps for one reason and one reason only, and that is because they were Jews. It had nothing to do with their politics, although a lot of them were communists, sure. It had nothing to do with that wasn't why. I mean, it was because they were Jews that they were swept up. That government decided that this was their policy, and they carried it out. I am concerned about that happening here. I
Well,
am,
let me mention a big contrast here.
yeah,
Okay, you're talking about the Nazi regime when it was starting to clamp down on all dissenters,
right.
not just Jews, but
Oh yeah.
the point being,
They counted out. They cracked down on Catholic priests.
all
I mean,
right, but
Michael
here's
Jones is right when he makes the point that Dachau was originally the main people in there were priests who were dissenters. But the difference, by the way, is that in that case they went after their political opponents. In the case of the Jews, they just went after men, women,
well, that
children,
was a
elderly.
racial thing, but I'm
Yeah. I
trying to
mean, it
make
was just everybody. Okay.
I'm trying to make this distinction. The Nazis came to power because they were a populist movement, at least at first, or they
Right.
masqueraded as that. So now you have the reverse situation. You have a fascist government in the United States, and you have a populist movement in the what you're calling the Trump movement.
Yeah.
So I think that the trouble with socialists is they always jump the shark. All right, and they may try extraordinary means to silence this group, but it's going to fail. You know, I don't care how big the FBI is, you can't arrest 30 million people. All right. So
No, but you could
they
round up a few. I mean,
you could round up a few.
people are being the FBI is showing up at people's doors, and I mean, I'll bring this up. Enrico Tario, who was the head of Proud Boys, he expressed dissent online, nothing more,
Right.
and he was put in. He's now been sentenced to 22 years in prison.
Right.
He wasn't even in Washington D.C. on the day of the protest. And there's a bunch of other guys like that. They had done nothing. I mean, they were, and now evidence is coming out. Thank God. And I think a lot of this we should credit the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, for doing it. But you see evidence that the police fired on the crowd, and they sprayed gas on people, and they were knocking people over, and that it really was basically a peaceful protest, and that. This whole thing, and now it's been admitted. I mean, the Gateway Pundit is doing a great job. That the whole thing really was completely marbled with federal agents, federal assets, federal connected people throughout, all across the board, who were there to instigate this situation, so they could have. Not only could they, so they could mainly the reason is so they could stop the assembly, and the assembly being was supposed to hear from 7 states,
Right.
and that's in the Constitution, Article 2, and it's been done before. It was done in 2004 when Barbara Boxer of California co-sponsored with a I think it was Cynthia McKinney or some rep contesting Ohio, saying that Ohio had been stolen from John Kerry. And there was a hearing, and it was decided to certify the Ohio delegation. The point is, there were 7 of those scheduled with 7 states had at least one senator and one representative co-signing a document requesting a hearing. That's what's required in the Constitution. All of that was going to be televised. All of the evidence would have been presented, and then the American people would have seen it, and they could have decided either way. We're never going to see that now because the whole thing was interrupted when the guy with the fake Viking hat entered into the U.S. Senate chamber, and they said, "Oh, we have to cancel everything." So they did. And then, of course, at midnight, in the dark, with no reporters, no hearing, no publicity, they just gavelled Biden in. So you want to talk about coups? That to me has a hint, at least,
Yeah.
of
Well,
being just that.
isn't it ironic that none of that could have happened but for the cooperation of Mike Pence, who will go down in history
Complete.
as an ultimate traitor?
Oh, absolutely. And
Uh,
and we've
but
talked about this before. I mean, he's he stabbed General Michael Flynn in the back. And I mean, I think you could. There's something very sinister about him. And now apparently he's talking to the people going after Trump in in Washington. I think this Jack Smith group. And he's leaking stuff. I mean, he is a very, very dangerous and very bad player.
yeah, well, going back to the overreaches of the government,
Yeah,
uh, let's go back to two things that your viewers will remember. One is Ruby Bridge,
right.
and the other is Branch Davidian. All right. Now, at the time, these were obscure cases. It turns out if people looked into them contemporaneously, which they did, there were large abuses, obviously, but it was generally perceived by the American public that these were fringe situations. And yeah, it's very sad that Vicky Weaver got shot, and it's too bad that people were killed in Branch Davidian, but these were weirdos, fringe
Right.
elements, and the difference now being that as normal citizens are targeted, it's not going to wash. I mean, right now it's isolated incidents. Some pro-life guy, they knock on his door at 3 o'clock in the morning. But if you start having dozens of publicized incidents where normal people are being subjected to the Gestapo, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work because when people feel that their own lives are being threatened, even an imbecile like Jonathan Greenblatt, after peddling left-wing notions his entire career, is now reacting against the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic faction in his own Democrat Party. So if your
Yes.
ox is being gored, then there's going to be a turn. Now, if the government is stupid enough to go after dozens of normal people, then hell will be unleashed. But
I hope so.
in a quiet hell, that the support is going to go down to zero. But it's going
Yeah,
to
but
get up.
they have the election machines. They've got the whole rotten uh, infrastructure that they used last time. They're threatening to launch another COVID. I mean, we're talking about people that are going to do whatever they have to do.
Right, do
I
whatever
don't
they
think
have to do.
I
But
don't think they would. I think they wouldn't. They would not be above just canceling the election. It's too much of an emergency. Who knows what kind of an incident could be triggered? I mean, look, these are very serious times. These are really these next 13 months are just or 12 months, whatever it is. These are good. It's very very perilous and it's very dangerous. And I just
it's very dangerous. But my difference with your viewpoint is I think it's going to, of its own volition, collapse. There's
I
going to
hope
be a
so. I mean, I think part of me thinks that too. I mean, I think the majority of the American people are not on board with it. I think that this anti-Israel thing, where you have these people supporting Hamas and not, after Israel underwent a mass murder unlike anything that's happened since the Holocaust,
Right.
and is something which represents, I think, a jumping of the shark. I mean, a sort of because these are the same rotten, motley people who were out for the Pussy Hat rallies. They
Yeah.
were the same people who burned and looted black businesses after George Floyd's death, which, by the way, there are things coming out about that. And they're the same people that you could go back. I mean, they would occupy Wall Street. I mean, I'm sure you probably, I mean, I walked through a couple of those. I mean, you saw who, these kind of moth-eaten, rotten, trust fund college kids sitting around and chanting these weird, we want this. Yes, we do. We want that. Oh, we do. These sort of nut jobs. Now they've really jumped the shark by coming out against Israel, and I think that's going to be devastating in a way
Well,
for the
you can
Democratic
always
Party.
count on the left to jump the shark, and not just the left. I mean, you take someone like a uni-party person, Nikki Haley.
Right.
You and I hated her from the jump, but
Yeah.
where she
It's a
really
warmonger.
accepted it was everybody who posts on social media must register their actual identity. And you come up with something that would not even, I think, would have gone beyond the wildest dreams of the Nazi Party.
Wait
If
a
they
minute. She said that everybody has to register their political, their identity. They have to.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really. I saw that. I didn't look into it, but yes. I mean, but at the same time, they're spending a lot of money promoting her, and now this Republican Party, which is a complete rotten mess. I mean, and it's bankrupt under Ronna McDaniels. I mean, they're sponsoring a debate between DeSantis and Newsom, and you have Sean Hannity hosting it. I mean, this
who's
is. I
going to
mean,
watch it? Who
yeah, but the
cares?
point is that no one cares. And they're doing another debate. I think next week they're spending whatever little money they have, and it's all to try to take down Trump. They're all hoping that Trump trips, and then they're going to put um, probably Nikki Haley up there. And they're not going away either. I mean, this is the same uniparty people, the Mitt Romney crowd. I mean, they're all, they still control Karl Rove. They still control the levers of the Republican Party, even though the vast majority reject them. And I mean, I think that one little beacon of light is Mike Johnson. Although he hasn't done much yet, he did release the footage of January 6th, which is a
Right.
great thing. But I hope he steps in and does more in terms of stopping this corrupt slide of people going after Trump. It's just horrible. Something
Well,
that
it
all
is horrible,
Americans.
but the more money they spend trying to take down Trump, I mean, at first I almost thought it was a parody when I saw that there was going to be a debate between Newsom and DeSantis. I couldn't believe that would be scheduled. Number one, who cares? Newsom is a terrible speaker. I don't
He
know
is.
how in the world
He
he's.
comes across as a real lightweight. I mean,
Yeah,
he's not. He doesn't even seem that bright.
no, no.
But look, he's like, in a way, he's like Nikki Haley. I mean, these people are almost demonic in their ambition. They'll do anything to win, and I think that they are backed by the same force that stole the election, and those people, they don't care whether or not anyone's going to pay attention. They have their own machinations. Did anyone pay attention to Biden? Oh, no. I mean, he sat in his basement. I mean, you remember the crowds that came up for Biden. You had those big circles, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you'd have somebody sitting on a stool, and it was just, I mean, but they didn't care. He still was put over the top. I mean, so I'm just saying that Biden himself, I mean, look, even through his senility, and I mean, in a way, he's the perfect candidate and the perfect president for them because, I mean, unlike Obama, who had his wits about him and who did care about his image, and he did answer questions, so he was a little bit more moderate. With Biden, nobody expects him to say any two words that make sense. He's just a complete puppet. He's an utter stooge. So he can sign the most left wing and the most radical things, and it doesn't matter. It's the perfect candidate. Probably a good successor to Biden would be John Fetterman. That's who the Democrats want in there. Somebody who's just going to be brain dead, frankly, with due respect. I shouldn't say it that far, but somebody who's just not really all there, who can just sit there and sign on to whatever it is, and nobody expects to really challenge him because to do so, you get used to the fact that he's not going to say anything that's other than just complete gibberish, and he doesn't care about his image. It's just if he did care, he doesn't have the strength to care.
All right. Well, here's a few other things to mind. Election fraud only works if it's going to be a close election. You can't perpetrate enough fraud to prevent Ronald Reagan from.
Oh, they did it in Arizona in 2022 against Kerry Lake. They just shut down the polls. They just shut down the machines. They put in ballots that jammed.
Special case. That was a special case because you had an extremely corrupt situation on multiple levels. The Secretary of State was running for governor, which was an immense conflict, obviously.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. You had all the media against Kerry Lake. She was raising good points. And I knew this, and people that know Arizona knew this, that it had this stupid reputation as being conservative because 1,000 years ago, Barry Goldwater was from there.
Right.
But in fact, as is the case, I don't care how red you think your state is. In any urban area, it's all blue. All right. So you may be able to go out to some remote area of Arizona and find a bunch of rock-ribbed conservative people. But in Phoenix and Tucson, it's as left-wing as New York City. All right. So who is Kerry Lake going to complain to? There's no sympathetic audience. She doesn't really have a national audience. But I'm saying that if you tried to pull a Kerry Lake situation in 5 or 6 states to the grotesque situation of where you disable voting machines and so on, I think that ship has sailed. One of the problems with the American public is this undue respect for authority. But I'm telling you, that has waned over the years. When I was pounding the table back in the early days of COVID and asking on multiple platforms that I was on, how many times does the CDC have to lie to us before you're going to stop believing anything they say? And the response then was, but they're the CDC.
Mm.
Well, I don't think
Excuse me.
you're going to get the same BS now. There's always going to be people who are fooled. Your friends in Brookline that wear 3 masks outside.
They still are.
Yeah. But I think the playbook is running out for the other side.
Well, can they pull off another COVID? I mean, there's already rumblings of this. I think that they're trying to sectionalize it in that they're talking about a virus that's only going to affect children.
Yes.
That's been found in China, of all places. This is something.
Places.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is something that they might roll out. Who knows what they're going to do? However, on the one hand, there are promising signs. I will point to the election in Argentina. Yes. Javier Milei, they call him the Trump of Argentina. He against voter fraud there, he won a landslide election, a significant election, and he's come in and he's tough and he's strongly pro Argentina in the same way that Trump is pro America. Then in Europe, You have the election of Geert Wilders. Nobody ever thought that would happen in
That
Holland.
was huge. That was
No,
huge.
it's enormous. It's earth-shattering, and they don't want to talk about it. He he came out recently and said something that even people like me may not say, which is that Jordan is Palestine. I mean, it's a I mean, it's an extraordinary statement. And then in Ireland,
Well,
you
it's
have this.
true.
It is, of course, it's true, but that doesn't. I mean, and then in Ireland, you have this guy, this migrant, come out and start stabbing children coming out of an elementary school. The country erupts into riots, and Conor McGregor, the wrestler, the pro wrestler, has come out and said that this is a problem and that he might run for office. He's very popular
Yeah.
in Ireland, and the government there, which I think it's even worse than their left wing government is one of the worst.
Oh, it's despicable.
They're coming out and they're investigating him for hate speech, and they're saying that anybody who criticizes this murderer who is trying to kill children, that they're involved with hate speech, that they're criticizing why,
But you know what, Chuck? It's not working. And there was a
Okay.
debate of one journalist. I mean, I've never heard of either of them, but they're in Ireland. And the woman came on and she was asking the guy why he had to mention that the attacker in Ireland was Muslim and a migrant.
Why?
And so the guy says, well, wait, I'm supposed to censor what I write in there? And they really got into it. And no, Ireland, I feel very, very bad about what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
Most apparently people on the outside, and even a lot of people in Ireland, had this delusion that it was some sort of Catholic country, and that hasn't been true since 1970, maybe.
Right.
So,
Well, whatever happened to the Catholic Church and standing up for Catholic values and in a country that is Catholic?
well, the trouble is that it was sort of resting on your laurels. You could use the example of, Notre Dame won a lot of football games until it didn't. But for 10, 15 years, they still had this reputation of being this great program and so on. Now, Ireland was Catholic. There's no question about it. A large number of priests in the United States came from Ireland. But that started to fall apart after Vatican II.
And not to mention the fact that the Catholic Church played a major role in Irish independence and in Polish independence.
Of
it was
course.
very political, and it also plays a major role in Mexico. I mean, it's in a political sense. It's not just confined to the church. It is a political force that represents a populist position. It represents the people. That's why the Mexican government, which has always been had an acrimonious relationship with the church, occasionally sends out a thug group to assassinate a priest, just to try to keep them in line. But the point is that the church used to have this movement about it that stood for populism, it stood for nationalism, it stood for traditionalism. That seems to be gone. What the hell is going on?
Well, it's not completely gone, but it's certainly gone at the hierarchy. I mean, getting rid of Strickland, which
now he's going after another one too, apparently.
And kicking Burke out of his home. No, I mean, I tell people, look, there have been bad popes in the past. This guy is a socialist. He was not that popular in Argentina. I
think Milei actually, when he was running, he condemned him.
Yeah, and it's quite clear that the reason he got the papacy had a lot to do with McCarrick. Whether McCarrick was actually paying people off.
Oh yeah, very corrupt.
People don't want to say, but McCarrick was a scumbag, so I wouldn't put that above him. On the other hand, the other cardinals are supposed to take bribes anyway, but hey, it's a mistake. I think the hierarchy felt pressured into getting a pope from somewhere other than Europe. Only
Well,
they
there's a
pick.
lot of people they could have chosen that might
Oh,
have
of
had,
course.
a more conservative bent, or maybe even, I mean, not to poke my nose into Catholic affairs, but a more pro-Catholic
Yeah.
position on things,
No,
at
he's.
least in terms of the
I'm
traditions.
not even sure he's really Catholic, but it doesn't matter
Right.
at this point because it's the old thing. All right, I'm Catholic, but how much interaction do I have with the Pope? You know?
Yeah, but he's still, I mean, look, the papacy is one of the greatest and oldest positions of moral authority.
But
It affects everyone, Catholic and non. I mean, that office goes back to the ancient Roman kingdom. I
I,
mean,
I
it's
I understand, but
yeah.
it affects everyone until it doesn't. Okay, if
Well,
you're
it
not,
does in ways that we can't always perceive.
yeah,
It's just it has a huge impact, and his impact is enormous. I hope that the next pope, maybe they can draw. I don't know how it would happen, and the mysterious way that the church works. It's very secretive, of course. Who knows what goes on in the inner chambers, but maybe they might find a conservative. They might find somebody who actually believes in God. I don't know. I mean, I
yeah.
hope.
Well, I mean, it's. I think it's going to swing back, um, but when I said how much do I interact with the Pope, yeah, I'd feel better if the Pope was actually good.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if I'm going to let that affect my belief system because this fallible human is screwing up, um, it it's the old story that my old friend, the late Vin Lewis, who was a Catholic apologist after being a cop, said that in every case that he knew, and he was involved quite a bit, anybody that left the church would come up with some stupid thing like, why do they think it's okay to eat meat now and whatever.
Yeah.
But it always, he said, it came down to personal sin and they couldn't deal with it. All
Right.
right.
Hmm.
So if I let the fact that I don't like the Pope cause me to leave the church, then who am I hurting? Right. Because
Oh,
the,
I don't think Catholics should in any way leave the church. The
yeah,
church itself is, I mean, from my understanding, again, speaking as an outsider, it's this infallible institution that goes back to the very first pope, who was Jesus himself. So,
well, the
to
first
me,
Pope
is
was Peter.
okay. Well,
Okay.
Jesus handed Peter
Right.
the mantle before he shuffled off the mortal coil.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
ever,
absolutely.
ever, ever since has been a consistent and unstopped papacy, which eventually took over Rome. The papacy itself goes back to the ancient kingdom of Rome, which was called. I'm getting like some feedback here. Um, the one of the terms for the papacy is Latin. It escapes me right now, but the office was established as far back as King Solomon. I mean, it's the oldest inhabited religious office in history and in the
Oh,
world.
yeah.
And it's very important for all of us, Catholic and non-Catholic, to understand and honor that office. I mean, look, the Jewish rabbinate in Europe for thousands of years, they did consider the Pope to be the primary religious figure. And if the Pope occasionally sent them a note saying, "Hey, take this piece out of the Talmud, or knock this stanza off of this prayer," they did it. They followed because they recognize his power. And so I only bring it up to say that this is a very, very important and profound position. I think that the election in Argentina was a repudiation of his papacy, because the
Oh, for sure.
candidate openly condemned and criticized him. And I don't think he's too popular in Buenos Aires.
No, well, he really wasn't once you got outside the socialists. Um, but as I said, maybe it'll someday come out how much McCarrick influenced that. But
Right,
people
right.
should remember one thing, that these fallible men involved in the hierarchy, they should never forget that the model of the church is the Virgin Mary, not whether it's Peter, who was a very fallible individual, or any of
Yes.
the other
Hmm.
apostles, uh, the model was always Mary.
Right.
So guys will screw up, and they did, and they have, but somehow the church keeps going.
Right.
Uh, would I like it better if they were all good guys and they actually were Catholic? Yeah, but
Well, hopefully there's a few left who might pick up the mantle. And I think there probably are. And I think there's
oh yeah,
growing numbers within the church. Um, so going back to what we were talking about, there is this movement around the world of people who I think, frankly, are inspired by Trump. It's
yes,
starting with Brexit, and I think that even Richie Sunak has moved a little bit more in the conservative column recently. And he's a conservative, basically, maybe not as conservative as some, but he's upholding that. Ireland, Conor McGregor could end up becoming the prime minister. That's certainly not unthinkable. He's very popular, and he's come out very much in favor of Irish rights and Irish nationalism. We talked about Argentina. We talked about the Netherlands, Germany. They have a conservative figure. I think didn't somebody try to shoot him in the face
yeah,
recently? I
yeah.
mean, it's very bad. I mean, but they're moving into a position of popularity there. I think that the Polish conservative government has been able to hold on. There's some contestation there, but I think they've held on. Even if they don't, Poland is pretty conservative and is very much a part of this movement. Hungary, you've got Orban. I mean, Trump is admired, and I think that the attack on him, the attempt to bankrupt him, to put him in prison, him and his family, I think that that is backfiring even if they pull it off. I mean, here you have this guy who could go back and live a comfortable life at Mar-a-Lago, spend time with his grandchildren, enjoy his golf courses and maybe do some more golfing and buy some more businesses and work on that. But instead, he's putting his neck out there. If he dropped out of the race, all these things would disappear in 2 minutes. This is all a political thing, not only to try to distract and intimidate him and bankrupt him, but also to try to attack the entire movement that he represents and that is growing. It is growing among black men. It is growing among Hispanics. It's even growing among Jews, I hope, I think, even though
Not
they
as
won't
much as I would like,
even though
but
they won't
it
come
is.
out and say it. But
Yeah.
but I think that it is. I mean, we'll see. Um, and I think that they are trying to, kind of triangulate that by intimidating Trump and intimidating everyone around him. And, I hope it isn't going to work.
I think that people are becoming emboldened. There was an interview of Elon Musk
Oh, yeah.
by Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's kind of a dweeb. And Sorkin raised the point of, well, aren't you concerned that Disney is pulling his ad dollars off Twitter?
He
And
said, go fuck yourself. Is that
exactly.
what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the point is, he's not going to be intimidated. And it was just very funny that Sorkin didn't get this. That you were trying to explain courage to some dweeb, probably got his lunch money stolen every day. That and but the fact is that, and as Musk said, if this causes Twitter to fail, then so be it. He's not going to kowtow to these idiots.
Oh, the only reason they're going after Elon Musk, and that includes the ADL, which is one of the worst
Oh,
enforcers of this establishment, and it's going to be a big chapter in my new book, which I hope to have published before the end of the
do
year.
you think the ADL is going to take a hit now with being on the
Well,
wrong side?
well, now they're being ripped from all sides because you have you have people who, because Greenblatt has taken a 180-degree turn since the slaughter in Israel, he's now saying that Zionism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, something that has been noted by various people going back to the late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said this in the 1960s. He is now taking a lot of flack from people on the staff at the ADL who are anti-Israel. I mean, this
No,
is
they're
a,
anti-Semitic.
well, they are, and he has said to them, "Look, if you don't like what we're doing, you can get out. We can leave, get another job." He's taking a very strong stand.
So when did Greenblatt discover that he was Jewish? What was the wake
I
up?
think the day after the October 7th slaughter, a lot of people discovered that they were Jewish, including
Well, you know who didn't was
real
Bernie
left wingers.
Sanders. Bernie Sanders
Oh my God,
is
yeah.
reading the Hamas talking points.
What a horror. What a disgusting spectacle that is. And yeah, I mean, but the point is that a lot of liberal left wing Jews are suddenly finding that they're shocked that
Yes.
the left is like anti-Israel, and then you have a lot of left-wing Jews who are completely a part of that movement. I mean, they're talking about Franz Fanon, the author of Wretched of the Earth, a real Marxist
Yeah.
who was very influential in terms of changing the dialectic from the Marxian approach, which was to create a conflict and war between classes, to one based on race, one based on geography, one based on the idea of there's some kind of a moral superiority to people who are indigenous. And that Fanon wrote that when you have people who, quote, are indigenous, unquote, commit atrocities and commit violence, then that's okay because they're doing it to help some greater good. And you have left wingers now who are pro Hamas, including Jewish left wingers, quoting Fanon and saying,
Yeah.
hey, yeah, sure, Hamas, they went in and they murdered every woman, every man, woman, and child they could get their hands on. But that's okay because they somehow have some kind of a fuzzy moral stand that they're indigenous, whatever the
Oh,
hell
wait,
that
wait, wait.
means.
How are they indigenous? I mean, who was there before
Well, I
the
mean, first of
Israelites?
all, this whole idea of indigenousness is I would suggest it's one of the bases of the Nazi movement, right? Didn't Hitler say that people who are ethnic Germans in the Sudetenland, in the Polish corridor in Danzig, they had to be reunited with the fatherland so they could be
Right.
free. They couldn't be oppressed by people who were not indigenous, who were not Germans. I mean, this whole concept
Well, okay,
is
but I have to say this in defense, can't believe I'm saying this, of Hitler, at least there was some factual basis for talking about ethnic Germans. But if you're talking about indigenous people in Israel, I mean, how many thousands of years do you want to go back?
Well, I mean, look, I would argue that if we must talk about indigenous people, the Jewish people are indigenous to
Of
Israel. I mean,
course, of course.
and that also in a more modern context, the Palestinian Arabs they really started to emigrate to what we now call Israel around the same time that the Jews started emigrating there in the
Yes.
late 19th century en masse. I mean, Jews have always gone there. There's always been Jews there. There's been a Zionist movement in Judaism from day one. There's not a year that goes by which, it's just an integral part of the Jewish faith and the Jewish people to take possession of that tiny little miserable swath of beachfront property that is called Israel. It's not a
Well,
big
they were
ambition.
always there anyway.
Yeah, it's a modest and it's a proper ambition. It's not conquering the world. It's God commanded Abraham to take possession of that tiny piece of land. We don't know why. It's a mystery, but that's what the Torah says. I mean, if you're a Jew, you understand this. So they do. And that's where they are to set up shop and create a Jewish commonwealth in order to try to be a more spiritual people and in order to have sovereignty. Anyway, the point is that in the late 19th century, when you had a major uptick in Jews settling in what was then called South Syria, it was part of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
You had them being Europeans, being industrious people, setting up businesses, setting up agriculture, setting up greenhouses, setting up farms. They started growing orange groves around Jaffa. They started to set up small industries all around, and they started to develop a modern, technologically advanced society. And the result was that you had Arabs from surrounding countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, go there to get jobs. I don't
Yeah.
blame them. They went there because there was prosperity there. There were economic incentives to go there. So most of the Arabs who call themselves Palestinian today, they emigrated into Israel around the same time that the European Jews emigrated into Israel. And by the way, Jews that we could call Arab Jews from the Arab countries began emigrating there as well. And today in Israel, by the way, of the Jewish population, they make up the majority. The European Jewish population of European ancestry, I think, is about 30%. And I think that in my own family, my cousin who emigrated to Israel in the 1960s with his wife, and who had four children in Israel, of those four children, three of them married Arab Jews. I mean, what they call Mizrahi
Yeah.
Jews. So you had starting in the 1980s, 1970s, a huge amount of integration, intermarriage. I suppose it's comparable to, in the United States, the intermarriage between Irish and Italians. It's just how things went. Peoples, they merged their people. So you don't really have, this idea of an indigenous Arab population. There were Arabs there. Um, I've interviewed on this program Mordechai Kadar, who is a former member of the Knesset. He's an interesting activist in Israel. And he's noted that the best solution for the Arab population in Israel is what he calls the nine-state solution or the seven-state solution.
Hmm.
And that was because there were some very prominent, wealthy Arab tribes in what would be called Palestine by the British who controlled land and who had, people, not a feudal system, but, they were significant. And he noted that in the Arab world today, the countries that are run by these tribes are the most successful countries in the Arab world. The Gulf states, for example,
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Dubai. I mean, these are very, very coherent, successful countries because they are run by this tribal sheikh who's been there for centuries and who has loyalty and who knows how to run his state and does so efficiently. Whereas, excuse me, the failed states like Iraq and Libya and others, they were cobbled together by colonial powers. They were basically took all the tribes and they created this artificial entity. So nobody gets along with each other and they basically are failed. He notes that in Israel, they should give sovereignty to these families, the Husseinis, the Nasibis. There's several of them. They're identified. They're still there. They're wealthy. They live in places like Ramallah and Nablus and Hebron and Gaza probably. I mean, and to give them sovereignty would really solve a lot of the problem because they would have an interest in being prosperous and in running an orderly society, probably interacting with Israel or at least maintaining peace with Israel. And, I don't think that that's ever going to happen, but it's an
But it is a good
interesting,
idea, isn't it?
it is. And it's something that actually has some track record. It has some cred in the Arab world in terms of something that could work, rather than create this false idea that there's such thing as a Palestinian nation, which hasn't worked. I mean, Gaza, 2005, it was handed over to the Palestinian Authority by Ariel Sharon, who was a real hawk. And in the process, they stripped out the Jews who had moved there in villages. They made it ethnically cleansed. Some of those Jews didn't want to go, and they were forced out. Others very reluctantly left. They had created businesses. They created,
Oh, sure.
yeah, I mean, they created greenhouses. They had, they were industrious villages.
Did Sharon do it hoping that it would fail?
No, why would he do that? I mean, the
Well,
Israelis
I never understood why he did it. He was the biggest hawk in the world,
because
and then he folded his jet.
the Israeli expectation was very minimal. All they expected was for a Gaza to peacefully coexist alongside Israel. Nothing more. That they didn't even expect necessarily a relationship with Israel. They just wanted to have a peaceful Gaza that would have a self-interest in creating a peaceful government there. They were given complete sovereignty. They had money pouring in from all over the world, including U.S. taxpayer money. The Israelis helped them train their security services so they could maintain the peace. They had every advantage to create what would have been a prosperous Arab state. They could call it whatever the hell they want. And again, Gaza is not poor. Gaza is beachfront property. I mean, it could have been
Yeah.
like Singapore. And if you even look at pictures of Gaza now, as the Israelis are dropping bombs, these are very nice mansions. I mean, this is a prosperous place. It's not some poor place, even though Hamas is corrupt and they've ripped off people. Nevertheless, it had potential to become a sovereign state, and Israel was willing to do more at that time. We should note that Sharon, or I think even before Sharon, they had evacuated Jericho and had turned it over to the Palestinian Authority. So, had Gaza conducted itself like a normal sovereign state, a responsible neighbor, Israel would have done more. They wanted peace at that time. I mean, stupidly, before Sharon, for reasons that who knows, it goes back to a pattern with Western leaders. Yitzhak Rabin, after having Begin, after defeating Arafat in Lebanon and forcing him into exile, he had to leave Beirut and set up shop in Tunis. Yitzhak Rabin, for some bizarre reason, invited him back to Israel to head up the Palestinian Authority, which was insane. I mean, it's one of these weird things that you get these liberal establishment figures like Rabin doing. Did he think all of a sudden everyone's going to sing peaceful songs and sit around the campfire? I mean, the guy was a terrorist. He brought back his thugs. He
Well,
set up shop.
Rabin was a globalist, socialist type,
Yeah.
and the curse on Israel, I think, is because it was founded by left-wing, commie-type individuals.
Oh, he was really. I mean, he was much more left than people realize. I mean, his mother was a communist, and he
Oh
was
yeah,
part of the Palmach, which was a ultra leftist militant group that I think quite courageously helped fight the War of Independence. I mean, they were very good soldiers, but they viewed Israel as being a communist entity, very closely allied with the Soviet Union, and they were communists. I don't know if that explains Rabin. I think he was pro-Israel. I think he was a nationalist, but for whatever reason, he invited back Arafat, and then Arafat launched the Intifada. So,
yeah.
just giving some background here, Gaza, after 1 year after they had been given the state on a silver platter, Hamas emerges and overthrows the Palestinian Authority. They're killing hundreds of Arabs, and they immediately used Gaza to launch an aggressive war against the state of Israel. And when I say aggressive, I mean lobbing thousands of missiles, building terror tunnels where they could sneak in and murder Jews. This isn't new. They tried to smuggle in a shipment of really powerful weapons off the coast. This Quran E came in from Iran. Israel intercepted it, and that's why they were they were having an embargo along the coast. Um, they then, they floated in the gas balloons, which were meant to burn Israeli fields and agriculture. And then, of course, you had the attack of October 6th, where they flew in with hang gliders with people with machine guns. So the point is that Gaza is now getting what it deserves. It's not been viable. They've been aggressive against the state of Israel. They've had their chance and they blew it. And I don't know what Israel should do going forward with Gaza, but they have every right as a sovereign state, as any sovereign state, to take out that government and to take out all of the whole terror infrastructure that they created. And they're doing that.
Yeah. Well,
So,
part of me as a cynic believes that Sharon had the intent that it would self-destruct, and he was right.
well, but why would he leave like that though? Why would he withdraw Israeli troops? Why would he dismantle
all right.
Israeli
He
villages?
was always accused of being this big hawk, right? And maybe part of him said, you know what? I'll show you why I was such a big hawk. We'll let these people do what they want, and you see what happens in a few years. All right. And it didn't take
Mike,
2
that's
years.
an interesting conspiracy theory. I think that they genuinely thought that the Arabs there would create a peaceful regime.
I don't think Sharon did.
I don't think that Israel had any designs on Gaza. I didn't think they didn't really want to be there. It's mostly Arabs.
No, I don't think they wanted to be there, but I think that if you're accused of being this warmonger hawk, bad guy, all this time, and okay, fine. All right, we're going to be the peacenik now. We're going to walk away. Let's see what happens. And it took less than 2 years for them to elect Hamas. And maybe he never publicly crowed about that, but a big part of me believes that that's why he did it, because it was uncharacteristic of
all right.
guy.
I mean, I don't know. We'll never know, of course, because he was assassinated. And we just, I mean, I suppose we could ask his wife, his widow, but we'll never, there's no, I mean, I'm talking about Rabin here. Sharon will never know either because he died. But, I tend to take it at face value. I mean, and I think that, the other little wrinkle in the whole story is that Netanyahu early on, and the Israeli Mossad were supporting Hamas. Yes, I think there's some evidence of that. This was the same. I think they did it for the same reason that the United States was supporting the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They thought that some Hamas would lend a counterweight to Arafat because Arafat at that point had launched an intifada, and they just, I think that that's what they were hoping to have happen. They were wrong. It was stupid, but we can look at it in retrospect, and certainly once Hamas showed its true colors, just like Al Qaeda did, it was already too late. Anyways, Mike, what do you have coming up on your Substack?
Well, I had that Thanksgiving piece from last week.
Oh, we should talk about that.
Yet. Got a few, it's a busy week for other stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of things happening, and I'm going to try to pick one or two to write about. But,
okay, I mean, I'm still working on my book, The Anti-Semitic Imagination, and it's coming along. This is going to be a bigger book for me, and I think it's topical. I mean, I'm basically looking to get a publisher for this one. We'll see.
Why don't you interview E. Michael Jones?
Forget it. But anyway, I don't need. I'm following him is bad enough on Twitter. I don't have the nerves. The thought of it is giving me a toothache.
Yeah.
I've talked to him enough. Anyways, Mike, listen. Thanks for joining me as always, and we'll talk next week. And let's see if we can get Michael Flores.
Yeah. I will work on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Send me an email. To our little Catholic discussion. First Sunday of Advent coming up. So New Year, maybe a better one.
Indeed. Well, it could go a lot of ways, as we talked about. So, Mike, thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good.
All right.